I love when two things can be true at the same time. Now, as you know, there is one word that starts with T that is a bit of a swear these days because the T word is used by an orange man bad.
Tariffs.
Tariffs.
Tariffs. Tariffs.
Tariffs.
Tariffs. Tariffs. Tariffs. Tariffs. Tariffs.
Tariffs.
Tariff.
And just this weekend, that bad orange man decided that he was going to increase the tariffs on all steel imported into the United States from every other part of the globe to 25%. Remember, orange man bad.
An extraordinary escalation from the US president, doubling tariffs on steel and aluminium imports.
US President Donald Trump vowed to double the tariff on steel imports.
The Australian steel industry is reeling tonight after Donald Trump extended his trade war by doubling steel tariffs to 50%.
Now, American workers in the steel industry love this. Why? Because cheap crap from overseas ends up costing more because this extra tax, when it crosses your borders, increases the price. Remember, orange man bad.
There's a lot of jobs here. There's, more coming now, and there's going to be a lot of more demand, with the tariffs and everything that he's doing. And I think the tariffs are a very good decision. Go Trump. Thank you so much.
So, as we know, the word tariff is really tax, a little bit like levy. And if you put a charge on top of everything that crosses your borders, apparently the rest of the world does not like it. This is an old school way of playing trade in a global economy where slave labour makes things in one part of Southeast Asia and then the Western world, of course, demands it must be used by, among other things, government when it comes to, say, energy. But, of course, when it comes to this specific situation, when it comes to tariffs and Trump and orange man bad, is that essentially putting a tax on something is unfair because it means that the idea of international and free trade is fundamentally at risk. And we know that there are many people in Australia who hate any idea of a tariff because, are you listening? Orange man bad.
The application of these new tariffs is certainly not the act of a friend.
It's certainly a hiccup, and it's certainly a problem when you have a trading nation that is a good friend who I think is harming not only us but themselves.
This is an act of economic self-harm by the United States. It will increase the costs for consumers in the United States.
We've already seen steel prices rise in the United States and they'll probably go up more. So this will impact American consumers more than it will impact the rest of the world.
So, if you clip the ticket, bad. If you add a tax on top of a good simply because it comes from somewhere else, bad. Orange man bad. Can I say that as many times as possible? Has that sunk in? Orange man bad. Terrible policy. Tariffs, awful, evil. Unless, of course, you want to do it in the name of the environment. And the government who is considering doing this, our government. Now remember, orange man bad for increasing tariffs on steel from Australia going into the United States. Well, amazingly today, Chris Bowen is openly talking about the idea of introducing tariffs if the things that come into this country from the rest of the world are carbon intensive, i.e. if they pollute when they are being made, then a tax will be paid before it comes into the country. Now remember, everything that is true about tariffs when it comes to Donald Trump is exactly the same here, right? Tariffs are bad because it makes everything more expensive. This makes everything more expensive. And if you think it's just some crazy right-wing talking point, here is the man on Taxpayer TV talking about the very issue today.
I know you've been looking at the option of Australia imposing a carbon tariff or a carbon border adjustment mechanism, as the Europeans are looking at. What's your thinking on that at the moment?
Well, we've been, again, clear that we want to ensure Australian industry is best placed to compete in a decarbonising world. As you know, I commissioned Professor Frank Yotso last year to advise the government. He's made public consultation papers. Those papers make clear he thinks the settings are right in the short term but there are things we can think about in the medium to long term. And obviously that's something I'll continue to progress this term with my Cabinet colleagues.
So not thanks for the idea. We've been doing the homework on this very idea. Now, they say it's noble because to put a 5, 10, 20% tax on everything that's imported into the country, if it has some connection to an increase in emissions around the world, well, that would, of course, increase the price here in Australia in exactly the same way that the Orange Man bad tariffs increase the price of things like Australian steel being bought in the United States. Now, this is really fascinating because, as we know, the Orange Man bad narrative, the tariffs equal tax, tariffs equal increase in prices and end up being paid by the, in this case, American consumer at a period of time where the inflation worries of the past couple of years have started to cool down, that essentially a 10% increase in something like steel would eventually feed back into an increase in inflation. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if the people who in 2022 promised a better cost of living, but actually it got worse for 3 years, who then got re-elected in 2025, saying again that they're doing something about cost of living, but then are equally at the same time talking about a policy of increasing the cost of things being imported into the country because of how they are made, what they are made from, and what the effect is on the planet, that will mean prices will rise. Now, some people say that we are past the point of no return where people are willing to pay anything to save the planet. But proportionality and reality does actually have to stick here. And I don't care what the political consequences are. The reality is that Australia is 1% of the global problem. Remember, we talk about the climate clock where for the past few nights I've shown you that graphic of all of the different countries and how much they produce when it comes to carbon emissions. If it was midday and that's nothing, we go to China, it's quarter past. We go to the rest of the developing world or the global south, that gets you to half past the climate clock. Russia, India, United States, quarter to. So there's only 15 minutes of the climate clock that is anywhere near as aggressive about trying to do something about the problem as the 45 minutes that are actively continuing to wipe out any and everything that we do here. So not only are we going to have a scenario where, because we want to set a good example, electricity goes through the roof, the landscape gets torn apart, we need to increase the cost of everything because if it's imported from somewhere else and it has an effect on the environment, we have to do that because if we do this, we'll be able to stop bushfires and floods and droughts from ever happening again. When we are 1 minute of the 60 minutes of the climate clock, where what China produces in 16 days is what we produce in an entire year. Does it mean we don't do anything? Of course not. Does it mean we try and do our bit? But if part of doing our bit is increasing the cost of things we are importing to the country by 10%, and depending on the month, Australia can often import more than we export to the rest of the world. And then again, if the idea of an export of something like steel is unfair, if somebody else puts a 25% tax on it to go into a place like the United States, imagine there were other countries that decided to turn in and put in carbon taxes on imports. Well, the Australian mining sector, how deeply would this be affected? Now, again, it wouldn't be paid in the borders here, but the cost of the product would be 10, 20, 30, 50%. It's up to the government how they set it. Once it crosses the line into another country. This was all open today. Not a big chat during the election campaign because, God forbid, we talked about big things like this. No, we had to talk about Peter Dutton being an ooga booga character on social media. We were distracted by 1 trillion different things in the majority of the country. Well, third of the country and then a third of the country with its preferences, decided to pick the way that it has, and the government is now double any other number inside the parliament. So they will just think, whatever, mate, we can get away with anything. And maybe they can. But you would think someone somewhere would have made a point here that this government on this watch in this term, already they are going to set a climate target of 2035. People inside the Labor Party want that anywhere up to 75%, which is the same level as where the Teals are, where the Greens were a few years ago, plus an increase to 83% of all of our energy coming from renewables and the billions of dollars that it costs to get to that system, plus 5, 10, 20, I don't know what the number is, % increase in the price of everything imported into the country. That's one hell of a cost of transition. But apparently this government thinks we won big, which means bugger any and anyone else. But we're here for the little guy when it comes to cost of living.